Now, in order to use the dashboard features that I'm going to show you, you want to have your data formatted as a table. So now I'm demonstrating this on Excel 2016, which is the newest version of Microsoft Excel as of this recording. It's also the version of Excel that you get when you have Excel 2000, when you get Office 365. If you have Excel 2013, then these features should work as well. All right. Now, I'll try to make my mouse. Sometimes I'll highlight my mouse by doing that and draw your attention to my mouse that way. Now, right now we see an Excel spreadsheet. Now, this workbook has 4 different sheets, and I'm actually going to involve all 4 of those sheets into our presentation. Now, notice how we have the customer sheet, the order sheet, and the employee sheet, and the shippers. Now, notice right now they're all normal data, or I'll just call that raw data. So let's see what we can do about that. In order to use the features that I'm going to show you, you want to make your data into what we call a formatted table. It doesn't take long to do that. It is very, very important that each of the sheets have the field names up top, all right? And then it's one continuous block of data all the way down. So I'm going to click on one cell within the block of data, and I'll pick on the Home menu up top. Then we're going to come over here, and I'll pick on the word Format as a Table. And then you have all these different styles. Now, I like to use this one because every other row will be that shaded color, but any of the formatted tables will work. I'm going to click on this one. Now, you make sure that you check this box where it says My Table Has Headers. Make sure you check that when, in fact, you have the headers up top. So I'll click on OK. Now, this is a formatted table, all right? Now, what I would recommend to you is that you give your formatted table a better name. Here's how we would do that. See how the sheets are already named fine, but you want to give your table a better name. So what I'll do is I'll pick on the Design menu up top. You get the Design menu when you get one of these formatted tables. Then I'll come over here where it says Table 1, and there I will type in Customers. We'll see why it's important to give those a better name pretty soon. Now, I must have already used that in a previous example, so I'll just call it Customers 1. And that's fine. Now, we'll do the same thing on the order sheet. I'll pick on Orders. You see how right now it's just normal data. So I'll pick on Format as a Table. Now, you don't have to pick the same style as before, but I am going to pick the same one. I'll pick on this one. And then notice how it's already checked, where it says My Table Has Headers. You do want to make sure that that is checked. I'll pick on OK. And now this is a formatted table. Now let's give this one a better name. I'll call that one Orders 1. And that's fine. All right, so we'll go to the employee sheet and do the same thing. Notice all of the sheets have the field names up top. That's very important. So we'll do Format as a Table. I'll go with this one again. And notice how it's already checked where it says My Table Has Headers. And now we have a formatted table there. I'll call this one Employees 1 as the table name. You can see where I am. Right up here. Good, and we have one more. So I'll pick in the shippers table, the shippers sheet. There's only a couple shippers, but we're going to format that one as a table as well. Good. And then you can see where I'm going to go right up here. Of course, we'll give it a better table name. Now, we can start showing you some of the dashboard features actually right away. If I go to the order sheet, here's that formatted table. Now, when you do have a formatted table, it gives you the pull downs for the filter. That's included right away. So you can do your normal sort and your normal filter. But we can add something that's called a slicer even into one of these formatted tables. This started in Excel 2013 where you can add the slicer onto a formatted table. Let me show you the benefit of that. To add the slicer in, here's one way. I'll pick on the Insert menu, and then under the Insert menu, I'll come over here and pick on Slicer, right there. Now your slicers are made up of your fields. So I'll choose employee ID, and I'll use ship country. Now, I could have chosen as many as I wanted to, but this will make the point that I'm trying to make. So I chose employee ID and ship country. These are slicer windows. So this is our first component of the dashboard today. So now to make it work with one of these formatted tables, you have to be either in Excel 2013 or Excel 2016. So notice in the employee ID column over here, you have lots of different employee IDs. But on the employee ID slicer, I'll pick on number 4. Now it's only going to show me the records for employee 4, you see. So the slicer is a new way to do a filter, except it's very visual. Now I'll come over here and pick on Denmark. Now there's only a few records that are employee 4 and Denmark at the same time over here, you see. So it's a great way to show the exact records that you're looking for. These are called slicers. It's a new way to do a filter. And this is part of what Microsoft calls a dashboard. Now to pick more than one from each column, on the new version of Excel, I can pick on these little check marks. If you have the old version, like if you have 2013, you would hold down the Control key. But now if you have this icon, I'm going to click on that. And now it'll let me pick more than one. So I'll pick 3, 4, and 6. See how it has to be employee 3, 4, and 6, and it has to be Denmark at the same time. Now I'll pick on the check mark over here, and I'll pick on Brazil and Finland. And now we have all those different combinations. Imagine if you had 3 or 4 slicer windows open, or even more. Imagine different combinations of data you can do. So I just think this is a great feature. Now, to get everything back again, I'll pick on this little X on the corner of the slicer window. I'll pick on this X, and I'll pick on this X, and then everything is back. So when you have a formatted table, you can actually turn the slicers on right away, and that'll be our first part of the showing you the dashboard today. Now, I can leave those slicer windows there, or I can also delete them. To delete them, I'm going to pick on the word ship country, and then I'm going to hit my delete key on my keyboard. And I'll pick on the word employee ID, and I'll delete that. The way I added those in is I have one of these formatted tables. Then I pick for the insert menu up top. Then I came over here and picked on the word slicer. And your slicers are made up of your fields, and you can choose as many as you wanted to. So now we're going to talk about seeing the slicers as part of the pivot table. All right, so now we're actually going to be able to make a pivot table using fields from all 4 of these sheets. And then I'll show you more of this, the dashboard components. So the customer sheet has a list of all the customers. The order sheet is a list of all the orders those people made. If you notice, the order sheet has a field called employee ID, but it doesn't really show the employee's name. The employee's name could be in the employee sheet. Now notice how this one also has the employee ID field. That's going to be important to tie those together. Now the order sheet also has a field that's called ship via, and it says 1, 2, and 3. And then over here I have the shippers table, and then you see that information with the full shipper's name. So we're going to make a pivot table using fields from all 4 of those sheets, and that'll actually make Excel into a relational database, and then we can go into the dashboard components. So it doesn't matter which sheet that you start on actually, but I'll pick on the customer sheet. And let's start a normal pivot table. So I'll pick on one cell that's not blank, and I'll pick on the insert menu up top, of course insert, and I'll pick on the word pivot table right there. Now, notice how it's using this table name over here. That's one of the reasons why I gave it a table name, a better name. Now, if I was on the orders sheet, then it would say orders 1 there. So it actually doesn't matter which sheet that you start with. Here's the really important choice. So I can use all 4 of those sheets in the pivot table. I'm going to add the data to the data model right there. All right, that's going to help us a lot. So I'm going to add the data to the data model. That really means that I can actually make the pivot table on more than one table. I'm going to click on OK. Now, it looks like a normal pivot table, except for one big choice I'm going to come over here and I'll pick in the word all. And now notice how I'll be able to pick the fields from the different tables. This is why I gave the tables a better name. See how they really show up better. Otherwise, it would say table 1 and table 2, and it's less confusing when we give them a good table name. Now, I'm going to make sure that I catch up with the slides that I made. In this slide, you can see how we formatted the data as a table. On the home menu, you pick on Format as a Table, and you pick one of your styles. Then you make sure you check that little box where it says My Table Has Headers. Then you see the formatted table. Then you would come over here on the Design menu on the left-hand side and give the table a better name. Then I would do that with all of the sheets that were involved, if there's more than one. And now here is where we started to make the pivot table. I picked on the Insert menu and I picked on Pivot Table. And then notice how it does have the table name there. And notice how I did check the box where it says Add the data to the data model. And now we're on this particular slide. So now I'm going to go back to Excel. Okay. So now I'm going to use, I can actually use fields from all 4 of those tables. And then we're going to see how it's going to join those tables together with a relationship in just a second. I'm going to expand the customers table, and then we see all the fields for the customers table. So let's say I wanted to report for a company name. So I'll pick up company name and drag it into where it says rows over here. And you can see each row became a different company name. The orders table has all of the orders for each customer. So I like to get a sum of all the orders for each customer. So I'm going to go ahead and use the orders table over here, and then we see the fields for the orders table. I'm going to scroll down, and I'll pick up order amount, and I'm going to drag it over here into the value section. Now, notice how right now, at this second, they all have the same number, which really, of course, wouldn't work out that way. So we have to tell it which customers go with which orders. Notice how you have this new window over here. It's asking us to define the relationships, okay? So in other words, it wants to know how the customers table and the orders table are joined to each other. Now, you could do auto detect, and usually that does work, but I'm actually going to pick in the word create, and we'll do it ourselves so you can see the process. Now, I'll pick on the orders table. By the way, this is another good reason why I gave the tables a better name right here. I'll pick on orders. Now, the common field between those two is going to be the customer ID. So you have to know your data a little bit. I know the common field between those two tables is the customer ID. Then I'll pick in the customers table here, and then it already kind of made the assumption where it was the customer ID. If that had a different field name, then you can pick a different field, but it did assume that it had the same field name. Now, if you would have picked on auto detect, it would have probably seen that anyway, but I want to show you this screen. So I'm going to click on OK. Now, as soon as I click on OK, watch the numbers over here in column B. You see now it knows which customers goes with which orders. Now I have the sum for all the orders for each customer. We were able to pull the fields from more than one sheet because of the relationship there. So that's pretty powerful right away. So now let's go into what we call our slicer and the dashboard. In this case, everybody, let's say I want to do a filter by the employees. So I want to do a filter maybe by the title of the employee. All right. So watch, we're going to add a slicer in. Now, when you click on the pivot table, you get 2 additional menus up top. You get Analyze and you get Design. But you only get those when you pick on the pivot table. So I'll pick on Analyze, and I'll pick on Insert Slicer, right there. Now, notice how right now it says Active or it says All. So the active are the fields or the tables that are already on the pivot table. I'm actually going to pick on All, because then it'll show all of the different tables. There's customers, orders, and employees, and the shippers, all right? So let's say I want to do it by, well, what if we wanted to do it by employee last name, just as an example. All right, so I'll pick on last name, and I'll pick on OK. So that's going to introduce the third table into the mix now. Now, right now, if I click on one of those names, see how the numbers are not changing yet. You would expect the numbers to change by employee. Well, guess what? We have to make another relationship to include the employees table in there as well. Watch what I'll do. Well, we're going to come back over here to this yellow section, and I could do an auto detect, but I prefer to do a create so I have more control over that. Now this time, I want to use the orders table with the employee ID field, because that's the common field between that and the employee table. Then I'll use the employees table, and it already assumed I wanted to use the employee ID field. Now I could have done auto detect, I'm sure, but I want to show you what's going on with these. Then you have more control over it. The field names do not have to be the same, and sometimes they're not the same. So if they were not the same, you'd have to come into this window anyway. I'm going to click on OK. Now that should really make things work for the slicer. So I'll pick on Callahan. In other words, notice how the numbers change because now it's only the records for employee Callahan. I'll pick on Fuller, and now the numbers changed again. So now we're actually making the pivot table from 3 different tables, right? Now let's take a look at our relationships for a second. In this case, I'll pick on the data menu, actually, data. And on the data menu, here's another way to get to the relationships right there. Now you wouldn't see that if you have Excel 2010. A lot of these features only work in Excel 2013 or Excel 2016. So I'll pick in the word relationships right there. Good. So notice how I have 2 relationships. I have one between the orders table and the customers table based on the customer ID. And then I have one for the orders table and the employees table based on the employee ID. Right? So we're actually making Excel a relational database really for the first time. This is pretty powerful. But in this demonstration, I'm showing you how I can use the slicer from a different table, and you notice how the records are updating. So this person only had, maybe this is all the customers for that one person. And you can see each customer, each last name for the employee brings up all their customers. So we're starting to get some great results here. Now let's pull another slicer in. I want to introduce the shippers table into there as well. Now on the orders table, let me go back to the data for a second. The data is down here among the sheets, right? So I'll pick on the orders table. Notice on the orders table, it says ship via, and it says 1, 2, or 3. Well, I'd like to include the full shipper's name. So we'll go back to our pivot table sheet over here, sheet 1. And I'm going to make another slicer of the shippers table. So I'll pick on the pivot table. I'll pick on the analyze menu up top. And I'll pick on the word insert slicer again. And then look where my mouse is going to go. I'm going to pick on the word all right there. Then that'll include all of the tables. And then we see the shippers table over there. And I want to do it by company name. All right. So here's the shippers table. Now, this data I'm using comes from the old Northwind database that used to come with Microsoft Access a long time ago. You can probably still find it out on the internet somewhere. If you typed in Northwind, a Northwind Access database, I'm sure you can find it somewhere out there in internet land. But it didn't use the actual shippers' names, but you can probably figure out who they're talking about here, right? So now if I click on one of those shipper names, right now the numbers are not changing if you look over here on the left. All right, but watch what we'll have to do. We'll have to make a relationship with that table as well. So I'll pick on the pivot table. That gives me my field list over here, and notice once again, it has to add that relationship. Now I know this time the field names are different. So this time, in fact, I'll try to pick on auto detect, and it says it found a new relationship. Okay, so I'm going to pick on the word close there, Now let's see what it gave us. I'll pick on the data menu and I'll pick on the word relationships. And it actually, I must have made this one before, so that's why it auto-recognized it. But if I take a look at that relationship and pick on edit, the orders table is using the ship via field, and the shippers table is using the shipper ID. So notice how this time the field names are not the same, and they don't have to be the same. But I must have made that in a previous example, so it knew to do that. But otherwise, you would pick that yourself. I'm going to click on OK. Now we have a couple of different relationships between the tables. I'll pick on Close. So now I should be able to pick the shippers, and the numbers are changing over here as well. So now we're starting to build our dashboard. And I wanted to show you that, you know, in the newer version of Excel, you can make the dashboard from other tables or other sheets based on these relationships, right? So now we're starting to get some useful examples. Let's say I want to see the one from Speedy Express from Buchanan. And then you can see how it's going to limit those records based on that filter. Remember, if you want to pick more than one from each column, then you can hit this little icon over here. Or if you don't have that icon, you would hold down the Control key as you pick multiple ones. So I'll pick on the icon where it says multiple select, and I'll pick on Callahan and Devolio, and you can see how the numbers are changing. So the slicer is a good component of the dashboard. To get everything back again, I want to go ahead and get the X over here, and then click on this X, and everything is back. Now, watch how I can switch it up. I'm going to go ahead and click on the pivot table, and that gives me my field list over here. Right now, I have it by company name. Let's say instead, I'd like to have it by country. Well, you can use any kind of fields in your pivot table. So I expanded the customers column, and now I'm going to remove the company name field. I'll pick up company name and drag it back up to here. Now I'll pick up country from the customers table and drag it into the rows. And now we have it by country, okay? So, you know, once you start to make your pivot table, you can really start to use all the fields. I'm using these two tables as slicers. So think about this. This column is coming from the customers table. This column is coming from the orders table. The field in this slicer is coming from the employees table, and the field from this slicer is coming from the shippers table. So not only am I showing you a dashboard, I'm also showing you how we can make it with multiple tables when we set up these relationships. The relationships have to be set up when you have one of those formatted tables. That's why I kept on stressing that. Now let's introduce a new item into our dashboard. We're going to get a chart. So I'm going to go ahead and move these over here. You can move these, you can resize these, whatever you want to do. Now we're going to make a chart from the pivot table. So in this case, I'm going to click on the pivot table. I'm going to pick on the insert menu up top. Of course, the analyze menu is what I meant to say. Analyze. Under the insert menu, if I pick on insert, that will be another way to get to the pivot chart, by the way, if you notice where I'm going. But just to stay consistent, I'll go back to the analyze menu, and then I'll pick on the word pivot chart. Then you see all of your chart types. Now, in Excel 2016, they added some new chart types that never even existed before. So any one of those can work right now. So let's start with the column chart, and maybe we can do other kind of charts as well. So I'll pick on column, I'll pick on this first one, and I'll pick on OK. Now we added a chart into the mix. Move that over here. Now you can resize the chart. I'm just going to use the sizing handles to resize the chart. I'll move it up here. Move these over here. So you can move your windows around, of course. Resize them. All right. Now, it's going to work like any other chart. So let's say I wanted to have the numbers on each individual bar. Well, that's called a data label. To change your chart, here's one way. I'm going to click on the chart. I'll pick on the design menu for the chart. And then you say add chart element. And then the numbers on the chart on each bar is called the data label. I'll pick on the word data label and I'll say outside end, and you see the numbers on the chart. Good. Now, why don't we give that a little bit more room? I'm just going to move these windows over so I can stretch this one out. That's better. You can see the numbers are on the chart now. So when we want the numbers on the chart, that's called the data label. So it works like any other chart. I can click on the chart, then I get two additional menus from the chart. I get design and I can get format. Now, another reason that the chart is like a pivot table is because over here, I can pick on the pull down where it says country, and then pick and choose the countries from the chart. By the way, you can do the same thing over here in the pivot table. So this is part of the dashboard, actually. It's another way to filter the data. So I'm going to click on the pull down where it says row labels. Then I can choose the countries from there. Or if notice, I can do that right from the chart. And then I can pull the countries from there. So let's try that. I'm going to uncheck it where it says select all. And I'll pick on Brazil, Canada, Finland, and France. So now we can see just those items. Now let's go further. Watch how the slicers are going to interact with the chart in the pivot table. See, now when I clicked on that name, the numbers changed on the pivot table, the numbers changed in the chart, everything is working together. And this is what Microsoft is starting to call the dashboard. Now I'm going to save this workbook. I'm going to say File and Save As, and we'll just call it Customers Dashboard. Good. All right, so you can see that up on the title bar of the spreadsheet, it now says Customers Dashboard. So just so I always like to save. I've just been burned too many times by a computer, so I'm saving all the time, right? But we're getting some good progress here. But notice what I'm doing. I'm just clicking around the slicers, and then I'm getting instant results. I can also use the filter over here on the pivot table. I'll go back to select all. I can also use the filter on the actual chart, right? So people are getting instant results, showing the exact records that they're looking for. This is what we're calling a dashboard, all right? Very, very powerful features here. It's really bringing our data to life. Now, I could even make a slicer out of the fields that are on the pivot table. There's nothing wrong with that. So why don't we add another slicer? We'll say Analyze, Insert Slicer. This time I'll use the company, how about the country, from the customers table. And now we have that slicer as well. And that would just be another way to pick the different data. Now, remember what I said. If you want to pick more than one from each column, you pick on the little check marks. Then I can pick more than one right from the slicer. So instead of using the filter, I can add the slicer for that field as well. But let's say I want to have the country up there. I'm going to go back to the pivot table. That gives us our field list over here. Then maybe I want to go back to it being by a different field. So I can remove country from the fields. Then in this case, maybe we'll use contact title and drag that into the rows. Good, now I have the contact titles. And then we can use the country from there. So I'm going to put this window away for a second. I'm just going to click over here and maybe move the country item over here. So now I have it by contact title. And then I can pick it by country or last name for the employee or company name for the shipper. Can you see the power of this? I can just get the exact records that we're looking for. And that's everything that we're calling a dashboard. Now I'm going to get everything back again. I'm going to click on the X on the slicer windows and get everything back. Excellent. Now we can see all of the different contact titles. Those also come from the customer table, of course. If you want to change the elements of your chart, then you can click on the chart and you can pick on the design menu. And you can pick on the format menu, and you're probably used to those, right? Now, let's add a new component into our dashboard. It's called a timeline. Now, the timeline is going to be based on a date field, so we can do a date range. I'm going to click on the pivot table, and I'll pick on the Analyze menu. Analyze. And next to Insert Slicer, it says Insert Timeline. Now, the slicer started in Excel 2010. So if you have Excel 2010, you'll be able to add a slicer at least to the pivot table. But then in Excel 2013 and Excel 2016, they came up with a new one that's called Insert Timeline. Timeline is based on a date field. So notice how it's just showing me all the date fields within the tables. So I'll pick on the order date. See order date within the orders table, and I'll pick on OK. This is a timeline. Now I'm going to move it over here, or maybe move it over here. So notice right now it's organized by month. Watch where my mouse is going to go. I'm going to click in the pull down where it says month. Then I can organize it by year, quarter, month, or day. So I'll pick on year, and now it's organized by year. Now, this is a little bit older data here, but I'll pick on 1998. And notice how all the data changed again, because now it's just a record that has the order date within of 1998. So that adds a new element into that. Now I'm going to resize this window a little bit so I can make things fit. So I can just resize that. Maybe not. Okay. So now I'll pick the order date slicer window. Now watch my mouse. I'm going to go to the edge of the blue area and get the sizing handle and drag it over to 1999. And you can see how the numbers changed again. I mean, this is so powerful. Look what we're doing here. So the slices would be based on normal fields. A timeline like this would be based on a date field, so we can do a date range. Let's see, 1999 for Speedy Expressway, for Devolio. I mean, I can just get the exact records that I'm looking for with instant results. Take everything back again. I'll pick on the X on the slicer windows. Now you can see how everything is changing. And I'll pick on this X, and we'll pick on this X on the timeline window. Since that timeline window isn't that big, I can resize it, and that's fine. Now everything is back. Good. All right, so you can really start to see the power of what I'm showing you. We have the chart, the slicers, the timeline, all working together. Plus, I have it working with different tables at the same time using those relationships. Now, another component of this would be maybe you want to see this broken down by month or by year actually on the pivot table. So what I'll do is I'm going to move the chart over here, and I might even resize the chart. I'm going to resize the chart, put this over here. Now, now I can stretch it out a little bit. Now, you see those data labels. I don't really need those anymore right now. So I'm going to click on the chart. Here's another way to add or take away the chart options on the chart. I'll pick on the plus sign. Then I can check those from there. I'm going to uncheck it where it says data labels. Good. I could always add those in later on. Maybe the data table can be helpful here. All right, good. So we did the data table, and then it shows the data below the chart like that. So that's fine. We'll do it that way. So now I can stretch that a little bit. That looks good. Now, what I'll do is I want to make the pivot table display by month or by quarter or by year. What we'll do is we'll move the a date field into the column section. So then I'll go down to where it says the orders table, and I'll pick on order date and drag it into the column section like that. Now it's telling me each column became a different date. So that's why it says I exceeded the limit there. But that's okay. I'm going to make it by month or by quarter. So I'll click on OK. There must be a lot of dates in that table, which is fine. So I'll click on OK. You move a date field. All right, so it did it by year at this time. It was by date. And then even the chart just changed for that. So watch what I'll do. When you use the date field in the column section, although when you click on the chart, it's called the legend series. But if I click on the pivot table, it's called the column section over here on the right. it will show it to you either by month or by quarter or by year or by date. Here's how you can control it. You're going to right click either on the month name or on the year or on the date or on the quarter. So I'm going to right click where it says 1998. And then the important choice is the word group. The group for the dates is built right in. Now you could put a date range into here. Now what I'm going to do is you can also pick one or more than one of these. If this was a time field, then I can group it by second, minute, or hour. But since it's a date field, I can group it by day, month, quarter, or year. All right. So what we'll do is I'm going to just pick on the word month there. I could have chosen more than one of those, which I'll do in a few minutes. But I just picked in the word month. Let's see what it looks like now. So it's still trying to get all those columns in, but then it should give it to me by month just like that. Perfect. And now even the chart changed. Now this time the chart is getting pretty busy with that data table, so I'm going to take that away. So I'll click on the chart, pick on the plus sign, and then I'm going to uncheck the data table. Good, that's better. And then we can see the legend there, so that's fine. Maybe we can make the chart bigger. Now we can start to see that better. You see the legend with the months. Now, I moved the date field over into the column section, or over here it's called the legend. And I'm going to right click on one of those month names. Then I'll pick in the word group. I like to include the year in there as well. So you can pick one or more than one of these. I'll pick on month and year. Again, it's going to give me that funny message, but it's going to go away. Now notice how I have the year and then I have the month as well. So that just kind of enhances our visualization, the dashboard. Because now I can collapse it by year. If I hit the minus sign next to 1998 or 1999, I can collapse it by year. If I want to re-expand the years, I pick on the plus sign. So I just wanted to show you how that would be another point of the dashboard, is they have another thing that they can interact with, as you can see. Now let's do it just by year. So I'm going to minimize 1999 and I'll minimize 2000. And then you kind of get the point of that. Now I have it by year. I can expand that by month if I pick on the plus sign. But why don't we do it by year? So the whole point there was I moved the date field specifically to the column section. Then I was able to right click either on the month or the year. And then I picked in the word group. And this is where you can pick more than one of those or just one of those. All right. So that's another component of our dashboard. Now you can also have more than one field in the row section. And that will give you the plus sign and the minus sign for the rows as well. So for example, let's see what field I can use. I have it by contact title over there. So maybe we can add in, what if we added in the country? So I'll pick up country and move it right into the rows. I just want to show you something. See how now each contact title is separated by the country, and I can collapse those and I can expand those as well. So that gives them another thing to interact with, which is all part of the dashboard. So that was just a demonstration. So you can put multiple fields in these different sections. And then when you do, you're able to collapse that section or expand it over there with the plus signs and the minus signs. So just to continue with our demonstration, I'm going to pick up the word country and move it back to our fields. Now, in the newer versions of Excel, well, actually, let me catch up with the PowerPoint slides. We haven't paid attention to that recently. So let me go back to PowerPoint. This is where I started the pivot table with the multiple sheets, and then I put in the word all there, and then you can see the multiple tables. Then we would start to move our fields in, and then this is where you would define the relationship. Now, I'm sure when I made this PowerPoint, I put in the word create, and then this is where you would edit the relationships, and you can see how that would work. Here's where I made the orders table and the customers table be related or joined on the customer ID field. Then this is just moving the fields into the pivot table. And then, well, let's go back to this slide. If you want to change a different calculation, this one does come into play. So I'll go back to Excel. And then see how it says sum of order amount right there? What if you wanted a count instead? Well, I can come over here and click on this pull down where it says sum. And then you pick on value field settings. And then you pick on count or any of the others. So that will be another thing they can change if you show them that. I'll pick on count. And now you see how the numbers went to counts instead of sums. Okay? Now, if you wanted to see the sum and the count at the same time, then you would move more than one field into the value section. But that's more about the pivot table. I think this is more about the dashboard where I can actually change the calculation. I'll go back to value field settings and I'll pick on sum and change it there. Good. So another way you can do that is you can say you can right click where it says sum of order amount and go to the value field settings there as well. Now, in the newer version, let's continue with our slides. I'll show you on that slide the value field settings, as you can see. Now, this is where I did it by the date. So the slides have a lot of these steps in there. I right-clicked on that date, and then I picked in the word group, and then you can see this is where we can put a date range, or you can do it by month or by year, and those kind of examples. That's exactly what I did. Good. Now, this slide is talking about where we did the insert slicer, the insert timeline, the pivot chart. So I just wanted to kind of catch up with the slides here. And then we start to see our slicers in the timeline, as you can see. And then the chart, of course, is all part of the dashboard. Now, at this time, we can do that one later on as well. But that was more about the regular pivot table. I really like to show you about more of the visual features of the pivot table called the dashboard. Now, another great component of the dashboard is something that's called the KPI. The KPI started in Excel 2013 and Excel 2016. This is a fairly new feature. Let's go back into Excel. Okay. Now, notice how I have the Power Pivot menu on the top of the window. So you may not have that if you have Excel 2010. In fact, you may have to turn that on in general. Let me show you how you turn on the Power Pivot menu because that's going to become important for us in the next couple of examples. I'm going to pick on the File menu, and under File, I'll pick on Options. Now, you might have to turn on the Power Pivot on in general. So I'll pick on the word Add-ins. See Add-ins on the Options. Then once you pick on Add-ins, you come down here and you click and you do COM Add-ins. And then you pick on the word Go. And then you make sure the word Power Pivot is checked. See it? Power Pivot. So that's step number one to turn that on. I'll pick on OK. Now step number two will be the actual turn on that menu on the top of the window like that. Just by turning on the add-in, it does not necessarily turn the menu on. To turn the menu on, I'll pick on the File menu. I'll pick on Options. We'll pick on the word Customize Ribbon. Now remember, the ribbon is a new word for the toolbar. Then the Power Pivot menu will be available over there. But you have to turn on the add-in first, you see? I had to go to Add-ins, and then COM Add-ins, and then Go. Make sure it's checked there. Then once I did that, then it should be available to be added to the toolbar. Then I'll do File Options, Customize Ribbon, and then I make sure the word Power Pivot is checked there. And that's the one that will really turn on your toolbar or on the ribbon. Okay? So that's very important that you saw that. I'm going to click on OK. Now, I do have the Power Pivot menu. Power Pivot menu has a couple really important features. Actually, I can manage the relationships even from here. So I'll pick on the word Manage. this is going to give me a visual representation of the relationships in just a second. It didn't work for me. So let me go with the diagram view. Let's see if it has those in there. There it is. That's what I was looking for. So you actually see a visual representation of your relationships. The customers table and the orders table are joined by the customer ID. The orders table and the shippers table is joined by the shipper ID. And then these two tables are joined by the employee ID. So if I click on that line, you can see the field that it's referring to. You see that? So I like that window. I'm going to close that window. And it'll go back to the pivot table here. So that was called manage. And then you can do other things within there as well. Now, in order to add a KPI, which is really part of the dashboard, I have to have a measure. A measure is a new way to do a calculation, and a KPI, or a key performance indicator, has to come from a measure. So even though I have a sum over here, I have to do the sum as a measure so I can include it as a KPI. So I'm going to remove this particular sum right here. I'll pick on sum and move it back to the top. Now we'll do a new measure. I'll say measure and then new measure. Of course, I'm in the Power Pivot window. Now this one is going to come from the orders table. That's another good reason why we gave the tables a better name. Now, in this case, I will call it a new sum. The description is optional. Now, if I pick on the FX here, which I'm sure you're familiar with, you're going to see functions that you've never seen before. One of the benefits of the Power Pivot is you get all new functions that you've never seen before. And maybe I could show you some of those. Like if I scroll through, right away, these are just some that you have never seen before, okay? If you just scroll through, and there's even the categories. But the normal functions should be in there as well. So I'll pick on sum. Actually, before I do that, let me show you maybe some that you haven't seen before. Let's do one that's called the earliest date. So there actually is one that's called first date. And that means the earliest date for each different, in this case, contact title by year. So I'll do first date, just to show you that there's a lot of new functions that you haven't seen before when we do the Power Pivot. We'll use the order date and make that a date format. And we'll use this is the United States date format. Of course, the other ones are there as well. Now, let's see what happened with that. See how it showed me the first date. Let's do it by company name. So instead of by contact title, I'm going to pick that up and move it up. And I'll go back to the company name. Good. Now the chart's getting pretty busy, of course. But we'll move this to the side. Or even resize it. It's all part of the dashboard, right? So just resize the chart. That's fine. So I have the first date for each year for each company. That was called a measure. Watch again. Pick on measure, new measure. We'll do the last date. And we'll pick on the FX again. And then we actually have one that is called last date. And then I'll use the order date there as well. So when we have the Power Pivot, you get a lot of extra functions. But we have to make a measure, everybody, we have to have a measure to make what we call a KPI. Now I'm going to remove some of these fields. I'm going to start removing some of these fields. And the last order date will be fine. Okay, good. So I have the new sum. Actually, I want to give that a better name. If I want to go back to the measures, I'll pick on measures and then manage measures. And I'll call that one, I'm going to click on that and pick on edit. And I'll call that first date. Good. Okay, that'll be better. And I'll click on close. And now, notice in this case, let's try that again. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and rename that again. I do have it called first date. Okay, fine. So I'm going to pick on close there. I'm just going to undo, and you can kind of see it is the first date and the last date. But I want to make a new measure so I can show you a KPI, and then we'll start wrapping up. So I'll do a new measure from the orders table. I'm going to call it a new sum. And now your classic functions will be available as well, or many of them will be. But if you've already scrolled through this list, you'll see a lot that you haven't seen before because of the power pivot. And then we'll sum the order amount field. By the way, I just typed in the letter O, and then it shows me the fields that would be appropriate. And then I'll use order amount. Now, it'll show the sum for each different customer, as we can see. Good. Now, I don't need to see that last date anymore, so I'll turn that one off. I'm just going to uncheck that field. So we have the new sum. So I'll do a new KPI. And then it is going to be based on one of the measures. Now, there's the new sum. Good. And then I'll type in 1,000 here. Now, notice how we'll say less than 500, less than 400 is red. Then less than 1,000 will be yellow, and everything over 1,000 will be green. Now this time it's going to let me do it. I can tell by the way it reacted there. There's the KPI. Now notice how the KPI shows up as ones and negative ones and zeros and things like that. Here's what you do. You come over to your fields, and then I'm going to uncheck it where it says status, and I'll check the word status again. There's the KPI. Okay, good. So notice how the green ones are going to be above 10,000, the red ones are less than 500, and the yellow ones are between that. So let's even affect that range again. I'll say Manage KPIs. We'll pick on Edit there. And let me change my ranges now. Let's say like 5,000. Okay, so maybe that'll be less than 2,000. This will be less than 4,000. And everything above 4,000 will be green. And that should have an immediate effect. Yeah, see, now we have a lot more colors. Okay, good. So now if I click around the slicers and click around the timeline, and the KPIs are working, the filters, now we have the dashboard working. It's affecting the chart. So the components of the dashboard would be the filter that's on the pivot table, the KPI, here's the timeline, then we have our slicers over here, the pivot chart. Now we're getting instant results, getting the exact records that we're looking for, and you can see how all of it works together to build our dashboard.